through it as hard as I could. Now it's gone forever. Hi, welcome back. I don't know if it's just me, but sometimes whenever I'm at a family gathering or I'm with family friends and they bring their kids along, it does surprise me when I hear these kids talking about or referencing things that pertain to violent or mature content, especially if these kids are younger than 13. The reason is because when I was their age, I wasn't even allowed to view that type of content. I mentioned in a previous video that I was raised in a pretty strict household where my parents controlled everything that I watched, listened, or played to make sure that it wasn't anything too violent or too mature for me. When I entered middle school, I finally had my own access to the internet and I was no longer restricted by them. So now I could consume whatever content I wanted at whatever time I wanted. Or my parents just had no idea how to restrict my access to the internet. But regardless, I was now able to consume entertainment that I've been trying to watch for so long at the time. But because my parents thought that it was too dangerous for me, they obviously didn't want me anywhere near it. Now, some people might believe that middle school is an appropriate time for kids to start consuming or at least learning about violent or mature content. The people during that time at my school, however, thought that I was too late. You see, they had already started consuming plenty of entertainment that was considered to be too violent or too mature for people their age. Meanwhile, I was just starting to learn about edgy comedy and sexual innuendos. But looking back at it, I did think it was pretty funny how I thought now that I had access to whatever kind of content I wanted, that I was able to now view very dangerous or very scary things that I thought would make me a cool kid. But to this day, there are still reasons for why parents or guardians restrict kids from actually consuming violent or mature content. The main reason is because kids are impressionable. So if a child was to watch a movie or a TV show where the themes included violence, race or gender stereotypes, drug and alcohol abuse, or even sexual content, they might assume that what they see is something typical or expected, or maybe even something that's considered the social norm. As a result, these kids might be exposed to behaviors or attitudes that might be too overwhelming for them or difficult to understand. It really depends on what stage in a child's life they actually consume the type of content or the type of entertainment that's considered a bit more mature for them. But it is worth noting that in America, there's over 50% of kids within the ages of 10 and 12 that are exposed to inappropriate or violent content online. So obviously, if a child younger than 10 years old, all the way up until they turn 10, has been consuming content that's just edgy or violent or too mature for them at the time, then obviously they'll reach a point where they're going to be desensitized from any of the stuff that they watch, even if it's just fake. Now, several studies have found a connection between desensitization and violent behaviors, meaning that real-life violence or violence in the media can impact an adolescent's reactions and beliefs about violence. As violence becomes more normalized, aggression and violent behaviors start to increase within that child. So obviously, when a kid's mind is still growing and they're trying to learn about the world around them, and they're even learning about the different emotions that they feel, as well as the impact they have on other people for doing certain things to them, if they get exposed to content or entertainment that's deemed inappropriate for them or too violent for them at that age, they might even get inspired to be that type of way just because they think it's cool or they think it's fun or they think it's just the norm. Sure, watching the John Wick movies is entertaining and it's awesome, but would I let a child between the ages of 5 and 10 years old watch that? Probably not, because again, they barely understand what the hell is going on in that movie. So if they see somebody who's saying horrible things or is doing horrible things to another person, they are going to process that as just something normal. And they're not going to think anything of it because they think it's something normal. It's very easy nowadays to convince somebody that whatever they thought was true turned out to be false, and all it took was maybe a video or a quote from social media or even something that was distributed by the news network that you believe is just stating facts. But just keep in mind, kids are not stupid. They are impressionable because they are curious about the world around them. So whenever they witness something that's new or entertaining, they're gonna start asking questions and they're gonna wanna learn more about what they just saw. It's up to the parents to give them an explanation, and depending on the explanation that they give them, it'll determine how that kid is going to react the next time they see that type of content. Of course, it's up to the adults to determine what type of content their kids are able to watch. But sometimes these kids just wanna watch whatever their parents are watching because they want to share an experience with them. So I think it's nice if you share your favorite TV show that may have a little bit of violence every now and then with your kid, as long as you are there to provide an explanation. I believe it's important to explain the difference between entertainment and reality. As a kid is growing, so is their self-awareness and their understanding of reality. Once they have that, they can then go out and socialize with people without having any issue. Now, I'm not gonna sit here and tell people how they should raise their kids, and I'm obviously not gonna tell people what they should or shouldn't watch, because you are your own person and you have the right to choose whatever content or entertainment you want to watch. Obviously, if you're now grown up and you have a lot more autonomy or rationality. But what I can say is that I do have experience being around people who restricted the access of that type of content. Content that might be entertaining to some people and is considered to be badass or cool, but for the reasons that I listed earlier, they just didn't want me to consume that yet. They were afraid that it would lead me to having thoughts or behaviors that I would not be able to control, and I would turn out to be a horrible person. But for the most part, I think I turned out all right. The only downside that came from that is just not being able to relate to the people around me. My parents might have thought that a certain cartoon show was too inappropriate for me, even though there are plenty of kids out there who are watching the same cartoon show. But because I wasn't allowed to watch it, I had no idea what they were talking about, and I couldn't get into the conversation with them about it. So of course, I was just left out of the loop. I couldn't really engage with people about these topics or about these pop cultural references because I just wasn't allowed to watch it at the time. But one thing that I do agree with is that the exposure of violent or inappropriate content at the right age can lead somebody to have a much more mature response to that kind of content. What I mean is that if you have a kid who's just going to watch a TV show that has plenty of sexual content or plenty of sexual innuendos in it, they're going to react in the obvious manner that, is goofy or immature, and that's what's to be expected. But when you actually start learning about this stuff and you are watching it and you're now able to consume it at a certain age, you process it and think it's still fun and it's still entertaining to watch, but obviously I know better than to actually act that type of way or say those things. The other side of the conversation is that these kids are gonna get too addicted to the violent content if they are exposed to it. And sure, that sometimes can happen. But to that, I believe that consuming something in moderation is fine, meaning that kids should obey their parents and they should listen to what their parents have to say. So if a parent is going to let a child watch a movie that may not be appropriate for them at the time, they need to let them know that you're only allowed to watch this when you're with me, or you can't watch too much of this because it's too inappropriate and it might just give you a false image of how the world is. And that just applies to anything. You can try viewing something or you can try something every once in a while. As long as you're not addicted to it, it won't hurt you in any shape or form. You're just trying to buy time or you're trying to find a way to entertain yourself by engaging in that type of content. Because it's one thing to be addicted to the content and act out of line, and it's another thing to view the content, to learn about it, and understand the impact that it has. If you're 18 years old, you're not gonna act the same way that a 7-year-old reacts to watching somebody insult another person and think that, hey, that's pretty cool, I'm gonna do that to somebody else on the street. You're old enough to know what is right and what is wrong. You're old enough to understand what is socially acceptable and what is also considered to be right or wrong in society. Another thing to mention is that just because you're desensitized to something does not mean you are mature. People sometimes believe that just because another person is able to handle gore or is able to handle such gross and inappropriate things, that makes them mature. And that's not true at all. If anything, it just shows how addicted that person is to the content that they view, as well as whatever they listen to or the types of video games they play. So now they just don't think of it as that big of a deal, reacting or behaving in those types of ways because they don't care. They see it in movies, they see it in TV, or they play it out in a video game. They just don't care. Maturity is defined by your level of acceptance of reality. Being able to understand that the violent content or the inappropriate content or whatever it is that you might deem to be edgy entertainment is nothing more than just entertainment. It's just a movie. It's just a TV show. It's just a video game. It's just a song. You know that that's not what real life is like. So having that self-awareness, you're safely able to understand the different impacts of what you might say or what you might do, And so you can go on life with a healthy mindset and not worrying about all the negative things that you have seen in that type of content. In the end, parental guidance goes a long way, especially for kids whose minds are still growing and who are just trying to learn more about their surroundings. Expecting them to never encounter this type of content is a bit ridiculous. Of course, they're going to end up watching it. It's no thanks to the internet that that's now a possibility, but it shouldn't always be the content that's to blame for how a child's mindset ends up. We also need to factor in the people that they surround themselves with, who is guiding them and who is explaining to them what is happening. And again, it's just entertainment. That's really all I wanted to talk about today. I hope you liked the video. Please make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and share the video. Thanks again for watching, and keep being awesome.